Brisbane-based developer Pikos Group is about to launch a major new project atop the renowned Kangaroo Point cliffs. Known as Sky by Pikos, the $200 million residential development is emerging as a test of Brisbane's burgeoning high-end apartment market. Joining us to talk through the project is Pikos Managing Director, Pedro Pikos. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Adam.
Now, most people in Brisbane will be familiar with this site on the top of the Kangaroo Point cliffs. Can you just describe it for us?
Adam, this is a site that sits on probably the most prominent escarpment of Brisbane. What we've always loved about this particular stretch of Brisbane is the escarpment is some 500 metres long. What made this site so unique is 20% of that 500 metres is made up of one site, although there's about 20 sites along the escarpment. So having 110 metre frontage to the view corridor made it incredibly unique. We actively looked at ways of acquiring it over the last few years.
I'm interested to understand what that actively looking at process was, because it was owned by an offshore developer who was unable to really make it work. So how did you come about acquiring the site?
So when we looked at the developer's original application, we thought that what they had done was designed a building to fit on a larger parcel of land, as opposed to designing to the lot, where it totally capitalised on the view corridor without trying to cram them in. We were probably quite vigilant in our approaches to them, and we were talking to them on and off for 5 years. When the time was right and that developer had given up, I think that the market never favoured that developer either, whereas we saw a lot more of an emerging high-end market, which wasn't quite there when they were designing into this lot. So it gave us some opportunities that weren't presented to them.
Can you just describe the scheme that you've come up with and the vision for it?
Look, what we did is we do a lot of work up front on trying to understand the market and just the changes in the market. And we try to watch the trends. And what we specifically noticed is the softening of that investor market, where external investors at one stage in about 17, 18 made up nearly half of the buyer profile. They were contracting, but what was growing was the owner-occupier market, which grew from around 20% to almost half the market now. So it just gave us a perfect opportunity to design the product that we are more comfortable in designing, and that is a high-end owner-occupier product instead of an investor-type product.
And so you've navigated your way through some pretty tricky approvals in Kangaroo Point. We understand this was a similar sort of approach. How did you approach the existing approval and obviously the new one that you got?
What we did is we try to understand what council's vision is, and then through that process we try and align it with where we see the market heading. What we believed was the right approach is to rationalise their building by fundamentally cutting two sleeves through the centre of it and trying to design into the buildings of Brief's document. The outcome of that was 3 towers that almost had a bit of a mini Marina Bay Sands feel to it. And then we thought, well, given it's such an iconic location, let's remove the ground floor commercial layout and let's put that all on the top floor and open it up to the public to make it more of a landmark. And thankfully, council understood the vision, worked with us, and we achieved a great outcome.
You touched on, Brisbane's, top end, high end apartment market just briefly. I mean, this is a big bet. This is a $200 million bet on that market. So can you just talk us through why you feel this is the right way to position this project?
I think it's very hard for developers to use statistics because they're done in such a broad brushed attitude, whether it's depicting average area, average price in an area. Kangaroo Point has some locations that achieve some very heavy square metre rates and some that are incapable of achieving those square metre rates, and then blended into one thing. So what we did is we approached Urbis and said, look, we believe there is a disparity, especially around the high-end market. So what we did is we directed them to compare us to both Sydney and Melbourne, but what we wanted to bring on was not just the settled sales, because the difficulty with settled sales, especially in the apartment market, is that sales that settled 6 months ago could have been sold 2 years ago. So the information you get from them is actually quite old. So what we did is we told them we wanted to blend recent settlements together with product that is currently selling in the marketplace, but we wanted them to select the top 20 locations in every capital city. And then we wanted to analyse that data. What we actually found was that Brisbane was 35% behind Melbourne and a whopping 268% behind Sydney. In a country where there is three major cities where a bulk of the residential investment capital goes, that disparity was, we thought, an incredible opportunity.
And so then where does that leave you in terms of price points and the type of mix that you've landed on here? And
when you actually look at product in those iconic locations of Sydney and Melbourne, you start to realise what we consider as expensive is I won't say entry level in those markets, but it's definitely considerably less. We think the market is emerging. We think it is changing. The buyer profile is changing. Some of the changes that COVID brought on for us were changes that none of us expected, and that was the buyer looking to bring lifestyle plans forward. The target price point is over $2 million an apartment. You know, some of the penthouse stock will go as high as $8 million. But the bulk of the stock we see as being just over the 2 million and under the 3 million mark.
And so what's the timing, Pedro? When do you launch and when do you think you'll be under construction?
We've actually already achieved quite a number of registrations. So we're looking to launch just the first tower in the next couple of weeks. So everything's gearing up for that. So I think you'll see a website next week and the agents get cracking.
And who have you got appointed in terms of architects and agents and potentially builders?
So look, what we've been doing is we brought on Conrad Gargett to take over from Archifeld and create a product where our instruction to them was we don't want the site alone to do the heavy lifting and do all the selling. We know it's an iconic site. We want the building to be iconic as well. So we've given them a budget that was actually about 70% higher than the original scheme, probably the highest end product we've ever delivered. And we're currently negotiating in the last throes of negotiating our tender with our builders. And we expect the builder to be on site by the end of September.
And just finally, Pedro, what does something like the Olympics do for Brisbane's reputation? I mean, how do you see that transpiring down to the real estate sector?
Adam, it's interesting because I'm a firm believer that if you are an investor or a buyer contemplating making some form of investment, I think that whole buyer profile of the type of investors that are emerging is changing at a very rapid rate. The investors that we see are coming through now are looking at higher end product. They're looking to capitalise more on a capital growth strategy rather than a rental strategy. What the Olympics will do will probably highlight Brisbane as a three-city approach, where Sydney's always led the charge and it's followed by Melbourne and then followed by Brisbane. We believe that a lot of those groups buying will see the difference in price point. And, you know, it's easy to say, if you were in a location like this in Sydney, what would you be paying? What would you be paying in Melbourne? And we think they will understand all of that. The Olympics tends to put a spotlight on a city, And it just opens it up to the world, not just to Australians. Given Brisbane's livability is probably one of the best cities in the country, we think the growth over the next 10 years will bring us more into line with both Sydney and Melbourne.
Well, Pedro, we wish you all the best with your sales launch and with the delivery of this project. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Adam. Thank you.